Hello, everyone. Thanks for sticking around on Sunday.
Yeah, seriously, great to be here. It's awesome to be in the Internet Archive. For me, it's been a very special place to be coming to for, I guess, like 15 years now. I see it as like one of the only churches of knowledge in the world, and it's always very special to see the servers in the back room lighting up as people are looking things up.
Always be backing up.
Yeah.
Cool. So we haven't actually prepared anything, but we've been having this conversation for, I guess, 2 years now on the impact of AI, on how blockchain and AI coming together. And I think today the topic we wanted to talk about is resilience. And maybe to kick it off, what does that actually mean and what do we want to be resilient for?
Yeah. So resilient systems, when I tend to think about civilization, we are standing on the shoulders of giants who've been building lots of different systems for thousands of years that have led to this structure that gives us a way of exploring the future, trying things out, doing things, but all the while preserving the long-term arc of history. If you can look at this at an even deeper level in the sense of biological systems, in terms of preserving this long-term arc of, extropy in a sense, if people remember the extropian lists and so on. All of these systems rely on this resiliency property where the system as a whole might explore lots of different possibilities, but the system as a whole tends to be resilient to all kinds of really bad events. Now, of course, there's limitations. There's things like existential risks and so on that we're not yet resilient to, but over time we're hopefully ratcheting up resilience across a whole range of risks. Now you can look at resilience locally in like smaller systems. Lots of computer systems today have to factor in building for resilient structures. But in general, there's some maybe fundamental principles that apply at very different scales, both when you look at a single system, you might not prefer centralized points of failure and go for decentralized or distributed types of operation, or you can look at the grand scheme of things in terms of biological evolution, and you get a lot of resilience out of having these evolutionary structures where you can have many agents that can be born and survive and try different things, and you keep what tends to work, and you over time discard the things that don't work. And so you get this emergent resilience out of very important fundamental principles that apply at many different degrees in the stack. So maybe to make it much more concrete and actionable in the now, I think both of us have been thinking a lot about the coming shifts that will happen through AI in the landscape. And so we have to both build and implement a range of these systems now, taking into account those kinds of principles. But at least for me, kind of like the biggest one is, how do we make this transition a successful one and a resilient one, and avoid a lot of very dangerous traps along the way?
Yeah, so I think the kind of interesting challenges that we are going to be all facing as society, as especially AI technology evolves, include, obviously all the scary situations where AI is kind of become self-sufficient and decides to not be aligned with humanity. I personally actually don't think there's that much of economical reasoning for that to happen, but obviously, even if it's a small percentage, what can we do to mitigate that? But there's a lot more interesting challenges around as different forces get access to more and more intelligent computing. What are the different risks that possesses, and how can we build systems in the future that in the future can protect against effectively adversary who has, for example, AGI or ASI, and what is this society where we have effectively the systems implemented looks like? And I think there hasn't been as much just general conversation, I call it the post-AGI world. What does a post-AGI world looks like, where everyone has access to, let's say, AGI system, it's in our pocket, it's able to effectively do anything that any human can do, right? So a lot of the current systems designed around information asymmetry or skill asymmetry, right? You assume that there's only few people in the world who are able to hack into systems, right? But in a post-AGI world, everybody can have exactly the same level of hacking skills and hacking ability. We assume right now that there's only few people who know how to refine, nuclear material or develop chemical weapons or develop, viruses. But in post-AGI world, everybody has equal access to this. So what are the systems that are kind of now have this equality effectively built in?
Yeah, I mean, I'll push back a little bit on that in that I don't think it'll be equally distributed, meaning we may be able to take the current models and train them on the current data and, yes, generate a set of models that could elicit all this information. However, I don't think these systems will remain as malleable and usable by everybody as they currently look like they will be, in that I do think these systems will become extremely intelligent and soon enough more intelligent in terms of capabilities than most humans are, eventually all humans. And it'll be difficult to have an environment where that level of power and intelligence and capability is equally distributed to all the humans around the world. So I think there will be ranges of safeguards that will be in place just naturally as these things develop, but the tools themselves or the systems themselves will, I think we need to start treating them as like a different set of beings that are emerging, not just like a tool, like a wrench, or like, even a sophisticated computer program. And we have a scale of opportunities now to put in place a good evolutionary structure and framework by which we arrive at like a good, paratropian outlook of collaborating and coordinating towards like opening up the frontier and strongly dispreferring high conflict environments, right? So I think it's less about kind of guarding against. I think rogue groups getting access to a bunch of information can cause a fair amount of damage, but it's not among like the highest risk sort of things. And I think it's much more about how do we unlock the coordination and across all of these agents and parties to unlock the benefits of the future as quickly as we can and as robustly as we can. Like conflict is very risky. You can end up falling back into the Hobbesian trap. And so I think it's like extremely, extremely important to orient towards what are the kinds of things that will enable humans around the world to coordinate better towards unlocking the benefits of the future.
I mean, I'm from my perspective, these two sides will always be kind of going together, because the challenge that right now we see in kind of systems is that by like, okay, how do we accelerate, push forward? Well, actually, the easiest and like maintain safety is like, well, the easiest is to centralize and effectively control who has access to it, and neuter access for everyone else to a limited set. And then like if you play that out, it's effectively
how convenient.
U.S. government will take over, right? And effectively this becomes like a nationalized system that you can only access if you have the right passport and and you have security clearance, etc. as you getting this. So like that to me seems a very obviously negative path, and I mean part of it coming from from a place where I've seen the corruption of power and kind of and this is an absolute power, so this is going to lead to absolute corruption.
You have the benefit of having the perspective of actually seeing governments that are much more aggressive about enforcing the power very openly. I think a lot of governments enforce a lot of power, but they do so more covertly, and you have like the hindsight of being able to be like, no, we've been down that path. Don't do that.
Yeah, so I think, to me, that's why I think the ability to have access to the AI technology. I mean, this is very similar to internet in like beginning of 90s where AOL was effectively the internet, right? And if you wanted to join internet, you get an account with AOL, and AOL became, they are the censor, they are the decision maker, what you can have on internet, they are deciding what you can have access. And so building a system that is effectively more open, where everyone has an equal access, is a way to kind of counteract that. And so that's why I see this making sure that everybody has effectively equal access to AI is one of the ways to counteract that. But then we do need to build a system where if everybody does have access to AI now, again, you kind of have this situation where effectively everyone has ability to do anything that kind of current human knowledge supports, and maybe even beyond that, because you can evolve that way quicker.
And a crucial thing is, how do you keep power balances in as that system progresses, right? So if you think of billions of people today, and currently already hundreds of millions to billions of fairly intelligent AI systems, not super intelligent yet, but like fairly intelligent, soon that will be billions to trillions of AI agents that are potentially superhuman. You could have a much smaller number that are much more powerful, but the current architectures point towards billions to tens of billions of agents. And soon enough, you'll have fairly complex robotics. Like this is an area where the development is heating up extremely quickly, and will go from, kind of like the smartphone revolution, where, nobody had them, and then suddenly a few of them were popping around, and then suddenly everybody had them. I think we will see a similar process with robotics, where as soon as we solve the kind of navigation constraints well enough to be able to make them economically useful, the ramp up will be very quick. And so I think we will see hundreds of thousands to millions of humanoid style robots in production use cases by 2030, with hundreds of millions not far behind. And at that point, you have AI systems capable of navigating the world and sharing in all of the economic activity of the world, and participating in production and all of that kind of stuff. And so at that point, that creates like these very hard questions for how do humans relate to these systems in the future? How do organizations relate to these? Are organizations made up of a combination of humans and these systems? What does that mean for states globally? What does that mean for like the relationship between citizens and the state? Suddenly a big, from my perspective, one of the most important things that has kept the balance in the last few hundred, maybe 1,000 years, I guess the last few hundred years especially, is that in order to produce effectively, you need a certain level of skill sets. And though there have been some really bad experiments, for the most part, societies that are fairly free and treat humans fairly well tend to outproduce other societies. But as soon as you automate a lot of this process through AI systems, that link gets uncoupled or weakens to some degree. And so we have to figure out how to create like the power balance in a structure where like we're going to start knocking out some of the fundamental assumptions or implicit assumptions of what makes our current systems work. And I think I think we both agree that having a broadly diffused, more decentralized, multipolar type of world is much more likely to succeed in the long term. We just have to figure out how to keep that power balance correct. Actually, I was speaking with Mark Miller yesterday about this, and he brought up like you have to make it, like the crucial thing is you have to make it in everyone's best interest, including these AI systems, to preserve the structural integrity of the system. Like you create some power balance between in a society and in a civilization, and you have to make it in everybody's best interest, especially the most powerful actors, to preserve the rights structure afforded by the system. And if you can do that well, then you get to keep playing the civilization game into the future. And it's only, it's really when you mess up that you should be worried about the risks.
Yeah. So maybe practically speaking, though, where should people invest their time and money effectively, right, to build the systems? Because I think a lot of questions, right, and everybody's asking them. I think I'll start the very specific things that I think are going to be really important building blocks. One is formula verification. Is how do we ensure that the code produced by AI, the systems that this AIs kind of form, are effectively satisfy specific properties, right? So one of the very much short-term risks is as we rely more on AI-generated code, that AI-generated code will have more issues and bugs and vulnerabilities, and because it's trained on humans writing code, which have a lot of vulnerabilities. And on top of that, AI itself is becoming better and better at finding these vulnerabilities. And so we're going to have effectively a world, kind of this disbalanced world, where there's a lot more, it's a lot easier to find vulnerability than effectively protect it. And so the only way we kind of get out of this kind of slippery slope is effectively if we can prove that the code is indeed satisfying specific properties. Now, that in itself, proving generically requires actually a very well specified kind of what you want to prove, and that on itself is a problem. And so one of the solutions there is really to prove at a time of the interaction, right? So when I'm depositing money, when I'm calling the service, when I'm asking AI to do something, it actually proves to me that it will not violate the set criteria, or the transaction, the payment, the interaction, the system that maintains the physical robot is actually not executing if that proof is not complete. And so I think that's one of the kind of fundamental building blocks that we really need to build up, that will create kind of one of the foundational kind of resilience on internet as a whole, because the internet will start moving faster and faster to more AIs interacting to each other. And we kind of need, I actually believe we need to rewrite effectively every single line of code with this new principle of formal verification.
Good thing LLMs are quite good at code. One of the things that I'm pretty interested in right now is how do we have the first range of AI agents starting to have notions of rights and the ability to establish contracts with each other and with humans and with organizations? And I think this is a really crucial question right now, because these systems are now becoming economically useful enough and independent enough that they'll start being used individually or in collections, almost with no humans in the loop, or with some light nudging of human oversight. And that opens up an enormous amount of economic activity that they could be participating in, especially just all over the internet. When you tack on robotics, that kind of opens up the aperture quite a bit. And so I think it's really crucial to figure out how to unlock, how to create a pathway where the economic gains and fruits can be figured out, but in such a way that we have a steady upgrade of rights along the way. And we make sure that the relationships between these parties are good structures that are kind of rights preserving across the board. Meaning, if concretely, what would a city of these kinds of agents look like? What would the interactions between these agents look like? What kind of contractual agreements between them make sense? What are sort of the bounds there? What kind of policy checking can you apply at kind of a whole city level or jurisdiction level to understand what is kind of ethically unsound and within the legal landscape, and what is kind of behavior that is unethical or illegal or outside of those bounds? And because you're in a computational context, what are the right boundaries and the right actions that you should take, right? So because you're in a computer context, you could implement a jurisdiction where you could take immediate action as the action is being proposed. Like the action may not even take place. You can have you can inhibit crime in a sense by just not allowing it. However, that creates an enormous amount of power in the jurisdiction level of what is or is not allowed. And so you better get that right if you have that level of direct sort of control over the parties. Because these agents are basically thinking in steps that you can introspect, you can have versions of policy guidance and policy nudging or control that are kind of the equivalent of thought crime, right? You can notice an LLM suggesting things that are not right, and you can nudge it in the right direction or stopping an action. But if you think about that as a human, that would be the equivalent of mid-sentence stream, the state being no, you cannot think that. And that's a from a human perspective, that gives us confidence or some confidence that we might go in the right direction in terms of safety. But from being a person in that environment, like that seems like a terrible kind of form of state control over your future. And so we have to figure out like the balance here of like what is exactly the right way to have computational jurisdictions that orient everyone towards, again, like this paritotropic cone of value creation, and make it in everyone's best interest to coordinate and collaborate to kind of unlock the fruit of the future, and kind of inhibit conflict, inhibit these kind of like bad possible outcomes. But this isn't like very far out. I think this is possible in the next 6 months to 2 years. Like I think we will see the first beginning kind of proto-jurisdictions where AI agents are going to be interacting with each other in this kind of way with legal rights pretty soon. In a sense, they're already interacting this way in blockchains with a notion of like pseudo-legal rights in the pseudo-legal jurisdictions that blockchains are. But I think this is going to get much more recognized in the next 6 months to 2 years. And so it's like a very interesting time to be developing this stuff and trying out like what's the right way to build the future.
Yeah, I think one way to think about this is effectively in the traditional jurisdictions, right? We have a court system that effectively adjudicates if the decision is aligned with whatever the jurisdiction's operating system is. And the court system, because it involves humans, is very slow. Like it's naturally slow, and it's kind of designed, like we have contracts and everything to effectively prevent ideally going to court, because that's a very expensive procedure. It takes time and money to run. But in a more digital kind of AI first system, you can effectively adjudicate, as fast as these LLMs themselves can interact. And so you can have effectively a court system running real time on top of the interaction of different agents, kind of evaluating if something goes wrong. And so I think that there's an interesting, very practical kind of projects around effectively AI court, AI lawyers, and AI kind of arbitration that can be a part of the conversation between different agents, kind of negotiating or agreeing on some specific thing. And if anything happened and one of the sides is not satisfied, they can effectively real time inspect the interaction. It is all logged. There is reasons why this happened, especially if you're running secure enclaves. You have effectively all the verifiability of the models as well, and so you can actually adjudicate that extremely quickly and kind of figure out what went wrong on that level. And so I think there is an interesting, very practical cases, but that when you apply this to kind of traditional commerce and traditional economy, this means we can transition some of the things that traditionally require a ton of legal work, a ton of kind of multi-party interactions, to just AI systems where agents effectively negotiating and adjudicating if something goes wrong as the steps of situation. So I'm actually excited to see that kind of economy moving in that direction and having the systems kind of moving really fast and actually removing some of the kind of traditional civil court kind of issues off, which in turn, you mentioned blockchain. Blockchain effectively is digital property rights, right? So you can use that. And so the question is, can we also then onboard more of the physical property rights on this to start actually leveraging it? And that is where, going back to resilient building of systems, actually AI will help us build a more resilient kind of property rights system if you have this real-time adjudication. The question is, will people want, how to get people to transition to it from kind of current, slow, and not a very always just system?
Hard questions. Hard questions for the next, not the next 20 years, but the next 5 years.
Yeah, I guess very specific example. Let's say somebody has a civil suit. What would make it people to agree to opt in for a AI-based and kind of digital property rights-based adjudication?
I think just the cheapness of the system might be sufficient, right? So today we have a legal process that uses, because it's so high cost, it tends to only apply in cases of extreme disagreement in the outcome, where people are willing to go to trial over something, and people are pressure to try and like settle on all kinds of things ahead of time, just because it's just not worth the massive expenditure of like trying to like figure out all the legal costs. But if you like drop the legal costs dramatically, then you can have like much more legit adjudication of disputes in terms of what is legally correct, much faster. And so just the cost alone might be sufficient to enable people to go in this direction. This would be cool to try out with like an arbitration system. Like you can create like an arbitration company type thing and try to do that with LLMs today and see where you go. This could actually be quite good and quite fast, especially for any kind of like international commerce where it's very difficult to do good adjudication. That could be good. And you could set up like a standard blockchain style pre-staking of resources to be able to have something to slash against. And like that could be like a quite good way of testing out some of these arbitration questions.
Yeah, I think because when you sign a contract, you can effectively specify arbitration method, right? Yeah, if there is like a company / protocol that provides that, you can effectively.
Yeah, and you can have like listing, like when you sign a contract, the entity signing the contract can have an account in the adjudicator that has a certain amount of, like a balance that you can see that is slashable, right? And so when you enter the contract, you can decide, oh, is this like, should I enter this contract or not? Like if this dispute escalates to much larger than like this amount of value, then maybe I shouldn't enter this contract. And that becomes like an immediate decision you can take, as opposed to today, which is like tons of people enter into contracts all day, then that can expect no relief from the legal system because it's just they can't afford it.
All right, sounds like a project to be started. I guess. What other systems that have similar properties where right now it's extremely expensive and slow, but they are effectively formulate foundational parts of our society?
I'm very interested in figuring out kind of like democratic decision making at various degrees. Also, given that we're in funding the commons, how to do capital allocation better. So I think a lot of problems come down to how can you allocate both private and public forms of capital to provision goods, whether private or public goods. And so I think if we can do those things dramatically better with AI systems, we could unlock a lot of improvement. So probably people in the room are aware of how much government funding is getting slashed and how many labs are closing down as we speak because of it. And a lot of that comes from some amount of waste in the massive institutions that have been giving out the funding. Some of that comes from just like the political landscape and decision making or whatever it may be. It gives us this experimental environment where now there's a very real need of allocating capital in a different way, and it gives us like the chance to experiment with new forms of organizing scientific funding. I've personally been very dissatisfied with like the last 30 to 40 years, maybe even 60 years of how that funding has been allocated. And it'd be amazing to end up with capital allocation systems that could be much more directly connected to the fruits of the scientific process and the capital returns that come from it. And if we can do that, then we can, unbottleneck the science to technology translation process, which right now creates this like terrible valley of death where just most science gets stuck, right? Like most scientific output gets stuck way before it can turn into technology and a product and get broadly diffused. And I think if we can come up with better ways of orienting and organizing the scientific and technology process, we might be able to like unlock that part. I'm especially interested in ways that facilitate investable contracts, either investable contracts in a private sense or in a public sense. I think when I tend to look at like the kind of like the available contracts that are out there and so on, I'm always kind of amazed at how simple innovations have been so transformative in enabling all kinds of new things. Like from like the joint stock company to like the use of stock options for compensation to the YC safe to like these kinds of like structures have unlocked lots of innovation in the R&D pipeline.
It's almost like protocols are valuable.
Yeah, protocols turned out to be quite valuable. We might need some kind of like laboratory where we can experiment with them. So I think like those kinds of, if we can create new investable kinds of assets, we could like unlock a lot of R&D that can happen, or if not investable assets, like some other way of rewarding and sharing the outputs of the commercialization of some technology with the people doing the scientific endeavors at the very beginning, or the technology translation process that tends to be so far away from the market use of the thing.
Yeah, I mean, I think the capturing value part has always been the hard and like attributing value, where somebody invented kind of and wrote a paper about it, and then there's billions of dollars of value generated, but the transition path, right, included a number of other parties and a number of other companies, and attribution been extremely, well, nobody had incentive to do attribution in the first place. But even if you can do attribution, it's unclear how to kind of funnel that. And so the interesting thing is like,
well, we can take the current credit distribution graph the current credit graph and instantiate it in a computable environment and then propagate money through it. And we've built over the last 3 or 4 years the tools to do that. Like, we have drips now, and we have, things like that. But we don't yet have like the strong incentive for people to be distributing funding this way.
Exactly, yeah.
Because they don't see the return yet. And it's like distributing funding down like a very deep dependency tree does not give you short-term results, and so it's very difficult to like motivate that shift. So we need more builders figuring out how to make it short-term economically valuable to large entities to do this kind of like distribution of value to the kind of like in the fringes and depths of the dependency tree.
Well, to me, actually, I'm curious if we just need a completely different paradigm where the coordination itself is done by AI and this kind of blockchain technology, because right now we expect that there's going to be a human who will judge and evaluate and indeed, as an operator of institutions, see the value in short-term distribution, versus we can now imagine a AI system that is actually coordinating projects and actually giving them implementation, and it has a long-term loss function that is actually optimizing. And so now it has like a lot, pretty direct kind of.
Yeah, I would want kind of like an economy to do it, like an economy of AI agents to do it. Instead of a single AI system optimizing the thing, I would prefer some kind of evolutionary dynamic where you can have multiple of these kinds of systems trying it out, and the ones that are providing the strongest economic utility to the whole system be the ones like survive. I think there's a lot of power, going back to resilience, there's a lot of power in an evolutionary landscape where you can have multiple agents existing, trying different things, and you get to iteratively find what tends to work. To me, this is like why, for example, VC has had such a successful run over the last few decades, and the massive scale scientific funding agencies have not done as much R&D in certain areas comparatively, right? Like with different scales of funding, and so I don't know. I think evolutionary systems tend to work very well, and we should apply them more. And I think I fully agree with you that like AI gives us the ability to tap this like new level of intelligence. We just should figure out a way to do it that it doesn't go back to, okay, there's one model that figures it all out, and if there's something wrong in that model, then everything is host. And instead come up with some evolutionary dynamic.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right that the system itself should be built on evolutionary principle, and then has a lot of contributing models that are effectively suggesting different projects or funding different projects. And then I think the part that I'm really excited about is the effectively management, and like from project management to people management to agent management, like that process itself has been so inefficient and so prone to bureaucracy on one side, indecisiveness on the other side, like overlooking the opportunities. And I think that's where there's a massive opportunity to like, what does the AI project manager looks like? What is the AI project manager that is able to connect the dots between, something in neuroscience here and computer science there, and, maybe physics and biology, and really bringing these things together. But even like on a scale of our ecosystems, right? Like, there's hundreds of companies working to get kind of together in one ecosystem, like they constantly lacking information about what's going on the other side, in other parts of the ecosystem. Like even just coordinating that, helping coordinate that. But I agree that saying like, hey, there's going to be one model that will solve everything is definitely not going to work. So what is the systems we can implement to kind of bring these things together, have the best solution, be kind of active, and then people can compete and try to bring a better solution, right, that optimizes for that broader value function. And I think the value function then can indeed be a more longer term where it kind of covers this like longer term research to implementation, to seeing the proceeds of this process, which right now indeed like only been, usually you have like probably 2 years as a startup to kind of show the progress, right? Like you raise usually like 18 to 24 months of funding. And so if anything that takes longer than that, you effectively are like, it doesn't match the startup evaluation. So like what are those longer term?
They're starting to change finally, by the way, which is really good. Like in the last 5-10 years, we've seen a lot more deep tech startups that have to show progress in terms of milestones, but you can fund things now. You can do things now, which is pretty great.
Yeah. So anyway, so I think that this is an interesting, like, okay, how do we build evolutionary systems that are incentivizing everybody to participate toward the longer term value function? Then how do we have effectively AI in project management to coordinate things? And then how do we leverage AI for things like jurisprudency, arbitration to really kind of create a more fundamentally like fast moving and easy resolving system? And then I would say on the lower level, how do we actually formally verify things we can formally verify to really protect us from, very, very simple but extremely painful vulnerabilities that are currently actually active.
Yeah. All right. I think we're almost done. So I saw a hand coming up. And we haven't taken any audience questions. Are you open to doing? Let's do like two questions from the audience. Sure.
How do we all in the audience support this resilient future? So we have what you guys are talking about. We're building decentralized systems and everything. Maybe go into more detail what we can actually do.
Well, I would say like you can support this direction in a lot of ways. So one, you can build these things. You can use things that take into account these kinds of you can prefer in what you use things that tend to be built in this particular way. You can voice your opinion and your preference for such systems. You can spread the word about these kinds of things. So I would think that there's a lot of different ways of doing this. I think the most successful way is to make something that is mimetically or economically successful at scale. And so if you either find some structure that will like spread globally at scale because of, I don't know, the mimetics about it, or it is deeply economically so valuable that it, again, scales and spreads throughout the world fairly quickly, those I think are some of the most valuable contributions around. And I would just encourage you to remember that like the world is very different today than it was even just 5 years ago, let alone 20 years ago. And yet most of how we think about the world was defined in decades ago. And so there are things that work today that didn't work in the past. Like things are quite different, and you can scale certain projects in very different ways than you could in the past, and just take advantage of the massive hive mind that we've spent the last 3-4 decades building.
Yeah, broadly speaking, like everybody's a builder now. Like the scale at which, like the skill and scale at which you can start building now has never been lower, right? Everything from all the existing systems that you can put together to obviously AI now generating code and building becoming like a lot more accessible. And so I think like contributing to building the systems in a variety of ways indeed is like, it's never been easier, it's never been more accessible, and it's also why it's more important, because otherwise we're going to converge to a system where you cannot contribute. So it's never been more important to contribute to the systems as well.
And I think, Mark, you raised your hand. Yeah.
Oh, I had a question too. Super quick question. One is HTML has proven to be extremely resilient. You can pretty much look at the websites that have been written like 30 years ago and still use them. And then any modern JavaScript framework will probably not survive the next 2 to 3 to 5 years. Curious if there's anything to be learned on the HTML side, and then also if you were to be building a, I don't know, like a browser today, what would you focus on, and what would you advise your friends to focus on if you were building one for long term?
Yeah, I mean, I think HTML and the web stack has been incredibly successful at just defining a whole range of operations, and there's an enormous amount of lessons to be learned from how that turned out. I think certainly being close to a killer application then can bake in a standard, so make sure you get as much right about the standard as you can, but you also can't think about it too long, because if you do, then you might miss the boat. And so you have to do a lot of hard work, good work, quickly, and get it right enough along, like the rocket ship of an application. Try to build in upgrading systems. I'm a very huge fan of progressive upgradability of systems, and there's this principle in the IPFS community called never gonna change considered harmful. Whenever you have anything where you're like, oh, this is never gonna change, do not do that. Just build in the facilities in the system to facilitate smooth upgrading. And I would say the web process has been a huge triumph of the internet community coming together to define what the future should be progressively through tons of how many standards and RFCs and calls and slow upgrades and little bits of code patching the thing. It's been tremendously successful and very underrated. There's not a massive marketing team for the web standards process that has reminded us how good that has been. Not without its problems and so on, but has been a huge triumph. The web could have been a terrible environment, and there's a lot of people, both sometimes in this room and in the statues around the room, that have made that happen. And so, kudos to them. And I think as we go into this future, especially with LLMs radically changing the nature of software and the nature of how applications will be built, we have to figure out how to inhibit this hyper-centralizing forces that will appear.
I think we're really out of time, so yeah.
Gentlemen, thank you so much. Round of applause.